Welcome to Andy Staples on 3, and we have games to talk about. There was actual football played this weekend, and we have so many things to talk about. Sam Hartman, was he the QB that was promised at Notre Dame? Caleb Williams back at USC. RichRod's 1-0 in the FBS at Jacksonville State. There's just so much right now. But let's start in Ireland. That's the game. Last year, we overanalyzed that game in Ireland so much because it was Nebraska-Northwestern. Northwestern beat Nebraska. You had the weird Scott Frost onside kick call. There was no drama in this game between Notre Dame and Navy. Notre Dame just steamrolled Navy. But the story of the game was Sam Hartman looking very comfortable as Notre Dame's quarterback. 19 of 23, 251 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he looked like he'd been running that offense for a long, long time. The line looked very good. The backs, Audric Estime, Jeremiah Love, Jabran Payne, Jadarian Price, they all looked capable. I can see Notre Dame people being very excited after this because let's think about this. As far as this goes, as we're talking Notre Dame quarterbacks of recent vintage, is Sam Hartman an upgrade over everyone since Brady Quinn? Is that an exaggeration if I say that? I don't feel like it's that far off. I think, Ian Book would be probably the guy that you'd say is the most successful of that bunch. And he was very good and I think underrated. I think he could do some things on the ground that maybe he didn't get enough credit for. And then his skills as a leader were outstanding. But I just don't know. I think when you look at Hartman and the success he's had, there's a good chance he could wind up being better. And so that's the question. We go through those guys. Like Everett Golson had the one good year. They were 12-0, but I don't know if all that was really because of Everett Golson. And then, of course, he was suspended the following year, so we'll never really know how that ended up. Deshaun Kaiser might have had the biggest skill set of all those guys, but I don't know that it amounted to anything. So that's the question is Sam Hartman the guy who can take them to places that they haven't been able to go because they were limited by the quarterback position? I think, part of the thing with Notre Dame is they're limited by depth because they recruit from a little bit smaller pool than everybody else. But I think that part has been a little bit blunted over the last few years. I think they've been able to get deeper and be able to be competitive, especially on the offensive line with just about anybody. So I am very curious to see what happens with a quarterback who appears to be more dynamic and just open up their passing, especially their vertical passing game, because they do seem to have some athletes on the outside as well. So I realize that we don't know what Navy is. They just fired their coach, Kende Matalolo, after last season. It's Brian Newberry's first game as a head coach. We don't know what they are and what this really means. We will know a lot more about Notre Dame in week 2. So this was week 0. Week 1 is Tennessee State. Week 2, they go to Raleigh and play NC State, which has a very good defense. And then offensively, we think it's going to be, the Robert and I and Brennan Armstrong reunited, what we saw at Virginia 2 years ago. So Notre Dame will get a very good test there. That's a very tough environment to play in. I think we'll know more. But the early returns for Sam Hartman, really, really good. We go about 6,000 miles away to Los Angeles, where USC beats San Jose State. Caleb Williams looks phenomenal. He throws for 278 yards and 4 touchdowns, 18 of 25 passing, looked very comfortable. Had a play where he picked up a fumble and threw it to Taj Washington for a 76-yard touchdown. He looked great. Defensively, especially early, there were some concerns where they looked like they were making some of the same kind of mistakes they made last year. They looked like they might have some of the same kind of issues they had last year. They were playing a ton of young guys. So, and then rotating a lot of guys, younger guys and transfers in and out, I think trying to figure out what the best combinations of people to use were. So I don't know if that was especially representative. They had this game and then they play Nevada next week. So they have a little time before they get into the meat of their schedule to kind of figure some things out. We sure as hell know that Zachariah Branch is going to be a star, though. That dude was amazing. He had 2 punt returns that I thought he was going to break. Then he breaks a kickoff return. He also had a touchdown catch. He is going to be unbelievable. That was so much fun watching him play. Later in the show, you will hear Yogi Roth from the Pac-12 Network talking about Zachariah Branch and the person he compared him to on the broadcast, who he wasn't sure if he was going to say it because he didn't want to put that on the guy, but you'll hear that story later. Question from Vaughn in the chat. When is Lincoln Riley going to look in the mirror and realize that he has to do something about his defense? Otherwise, he'll just be doomed to keep repeating this over and over. So what Vaughn is referring to is, if you watched the first half of that game, there was a drive where San Jose State had a 3rd and 22 that they converted, and then they go score a touchdown. And then USC scores, but then San Jose State gets a stop and then comes back and hits a long touchdown pass right before halftime where USC had a massive coverage bust. It did look like USC hadn't learned much from the collapse against Tulane, from the second half of the Pac-12 championship game against Utah. I want to see more. Now, I will say, I thought Bear Alexander, Anthony Lucas, those are 2 high-profile transfers. Bear from Georgia, Anthony Lucas from Texas A&M, looked very good on the defensive line. Bear Alexander was wrecking people. There was one series where he just detonated the play on 1st down and 2nd down, and San Jose State triple teamed him on 3rd down, which opened up other people to make a play. That's the sort of thing you're looking for. But if you look at USC's front, if you look at who they're rotating in, it's Alex Grinch's defenses tend to be small up front. Bear Alexander's the biggest guy at 300 pounds. Their 3 technique guys are about 275. It's not as big as the fronts of the teams that we see competing for national titles. That is a conscious choice. I believe it is probably a wrong choice. We will see what happens. But USC is not going to lack for points. So whoever plays them and tries to beat them, yes, you may have some success against their defense, but you're going to have to stop them too. And I don't think it's going to be that easy. You can say it's just San Jose State, but I really don't think it's going to be that easy to stop USC, no matter who you are. But I will say, if you look at their schedule, it could get very naughty toward the end of the season. They probably should start 6-0. Then they go into Notre Dame, and then things get real, because in rapid succession, they have Notre Dame and Utah and Oregon and UCLA, and it's not going to be easy. So that's the thing that USC has got to figure out, that defensive part of it, because offensively they're going to be fine. Caleb Williams is as long as he's healthy, is going to put up massive numbers. Hunter asked a question in the chat: does Branch equal Percy Harvin? That is a really interesting comparison. I hadn't thought of that one, but I think that's probably more accurate than the one Yogi mentions in the broadcast. The Percy one, because of what he can do with the return game, and just because of the how smooth he is with the ball, and he was so fast. He was like he shot out of a cannon every time he touched the ball. So that's an interesting comparison, and I like it. So we got another chat question. Grinch and Lincoln Riley really leveraged the depth chart and rotated throughout both sides of the ball. How much of that is fulfilling promises to incoming recruits that they get playing time? Just thinking. I don't even think it's that. I think it's just trying to figure out what the best combination to put on the field is. You notice they did it with their offensive line. They definitely did it with the defense line, but they were doing it in the secondary too. So I bet that by the time they hit that part of the schedule that I'm talking about, that back half of the schedule, they will be much more consistent in who plays and when. I think they've got some time to figure some stuff out. So it may be that we're criticizing this stuff, but it's just them experimenting personnel-wise. So that one I'm not as worried about. I do want to see them, there's that 3rd and 22 play I mentioned. Basically, Chevin Cordero, San Jose State's quarterback, gets out the back door on a scramble, and it's man-to-man defense, and the DBs are all shadowing receivers, so there's nobody to tackle him. But they run a twist up stunt up front, which they have better defensive linemen than San Jose State's offensive. Like, they don't need to do anything fancy. Just let your good players be good. And that's something, if you watch Alabama or you watch Georgia, Like Nick Saban and Kirby Smart don't get fancy. They don't get exotic until you give them a reason to, until you give them a reason to worry. They just let their better players be better. And so we'll see if USC can figure that out, because in a lot of cases, they're going to have the better players. There won't be every case, but in most cases, they will have the better players. All right. So we got the RichRod watch. Rich Rodriguez, the coach of Jacksonville State. The other Gamecocks now 1-0 as an FBS team. They beat UTEP. UMass beat New Mexico State. Maybe the play of that game in a losing effort, New Mexico State quarterback Diego Pavia throwing the ball after having his helmet ripped all the way around his head. So the back of his helmet is over his eyes. He still managed to throw the ball away, and it was a spectacular play, even if it didn't really mean a whole lot. Bit of news, non-game related, that came down on Sunday morning. Arizona State is imposing a bowl ban on this year's team. They are self-imposing a postseason ban to get out ahead of the NCAA investigation into the Herm Edwards staff. This is all the recruiting improprieties alleged during Herm Edwards' tenure, basically, that they were running official and unofficial visits during COVID. Very, very similar to the Jeremy Pruitt stuff at Tennessee. Now, here's where this is kind of messed up. They didn't decide to do this until now, where nobody can transfer because the season's already started. So, and class has already started, so they can't go anywhere. And it's pretty messed up. You could have been a little more honest and forthright with your players, but that's what we come to expect from all of the schools and from the NCAA. They don't really care about the players. So this is how this works. Now, a smarter thing to do, and if you've paid attention during realignment, you know that the people running Arizona State are not the smartest when it comes to sports. But the smarter thing to do would have been in the spring of 2022, because you already knew about all this stuff. They've been being investigated for a while. You know you're probably going to fire Herm Edwards in 2022, which they did. You know you're probably not going to be very good in 2022, which they weren't. They were 3-9. You should have done it then. That's when you should have done it, because what would have happened is everybody would have transferred. You would have had the crappy season you were expecting. You would have fired Herm Edwards just like you were expecting. And then Kenny Dillingham would have been able to come in and not have to worry about running anybody off, not have to worry about gently encouraging anyone to transfer. He would have been able to come in with a basically wide open roster and fill it up. So that would have been more fun, I think, than this, because you'd already be done with that. And you wouldn't have to worry about looking like jerks because you just basically entrapped your seniors. But again, Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State, Ray Anderson, the AD, they were the ones clinging to that Apple deal in the Pac-12 when they had a better Big 12 deal on the table. They're not good at this stuff, clearly. And, this all could have been taken care of by now. All of it. But again, you did it. Now, the other potential solution is you could have not imposed the bowl ban. Because go to the Tennessee case. Remember, they fined Tennessee like $8 million. And obviously, they levied a punishment on Jeremy Pruitt, who'd already been fired. They're going to punish Herm Edwards. They're going to punish whatever assistant coaches got fired. But maybe they wouldn't have even given you a postseason ban. Maybe that wasn't going to happen because the NCAA is trying not to punish future players for things that past coaches did. So I'm not entirely sure why they did this, but they're doing it now. I do understand the logic of you want to give Kenny Dillingham basically, this is a year zero. He doesn't have to worry about what the record is. He doesn't worry about the postseason. He's starting a true freshman at quarterback in Jaden Rashada because Drew Pine got hurt. I get that. But there was a better way to do this. There just was. So we'll see what happens. We have a big, big show for you today. We'll talk about Jaden Rashada with Yogi Roth, who's deeply involved in the Elite 11 and the quarterback recruiting industrial complex and has some really interesting stories about that. But we're also going to talk to another quarterback who is getting a chance to be the opening day starter for the second consecutive year. But last year, he didn't end up the starter for his team. It's Chandler Morris, the TCU quarterback. Remember, he started against Colorado on opening day, got hurt. Max Duggan takes the job and then never gives it back and leads TCU to the national championship game. Chandler Morris had a lot of really interesting things to say about what he learned from that and just how that affected him and how it's made him a different kind of quarterback coming into this year. So we're gonna talk to Chandler Morris, but first I got to talk to you about PrizePicks. This is a new sponsor. Very excited about these guys. It is daily fantasy. It's a way to have action on games in 31 different states, including ones that you may think you're not able to have action on the games, but California, Florida, Texas, it's operating in those states. And basically what you do is you download the app, use the referral code Andy, and first time users deposit and use that referral code will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you another $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you another $50. So how does it work? It's squares. You pick 2 to 6 players, and you just pick if they're going to go more or less than the projection. And you can win up to 25 times your money on one entry. So I have a season-long set of projections that I've taken. So I've got Wisconsin running back Braylon Allen to go more than 1,075.5 rushing yards. He had 1,242 last year. So I feel pretty good about this. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but that Derry Raid offense that Phil Longo has brought in, you say, okay, it's an air raid type thing. How do you expect the backs to gain a bunch of yards? Well, in the best version of this offense, I saw Michael Carter and Javonte Williams each go for over 1,000 at North Carolina in 2020. So if it works, Braylon Allen's going to run for a ton of yards. So that's what I'm banking on. Florida State quarterback Jordan Travis, more than 23.5 touchdowns. He threw 24 last year. He's got better receivers this year. Johnny Wilson's a year older, a year better. And Keon Coleman, the transfer from Michigan State, I saw practice last week. He looked outstanding. They got weapons at Florida State. So I feel like Jordan Travis can have a better year than he had last year. Oregon quarterback Bo Nix, more than 23.5 touchdowns. He threw 29 last year. His numbers were very comparable to Marcus Mariota's Heisman season before he got dinged up against Washington. So I think Bo's going to go quite a bit higher than 23.5 touchdowns. And then this is the one kind of leap of faith, tricky one for me. Georgia tight end Brock Bowers, more than 7.5 touchdown catches. He caught 7 last year. He had 8 the year before. So he has 15 for his career. So they basically split the difference on this one. And this is my leap of faith. This is me saying that he is going to be the guy they're targeting, and he's going to catch a bunch of touchdown passes. So we'll see. But it's a fun way to have some action on the games. And right now, until the first NFL games are played, you can get a free Dak Prescott square because they do every sport, basically any sport you can watch. The NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, they do like disc golf. They do everything. But if you log in now and you do it now, there's a free Dak Prescott square. If he throws for 1 yard in the Cowboys season opener, then you win on that square. Now you have to win the other one, a minimum of 2, but they're giving you a good head start. So that's PrizePicks. You can use the promo code Andy. Download that app, promo code Andy, get yourself going. Going to be a fun season with them. We're going to be talking a lot about them, and there's definitely some interesting action out there. All right. Speaking of action, the action will be in Fort Worth this weekend. The eyes of college football will be on Amon G. Carter Stadium because Coach Prime is coming in. But who's he going to be playing? Oh, yeah, that team that played for the national title last year, TCU. Chandler Morris is TCU's new starting quarterback. He was once TCU's starting quarterback, and now he's got it back. He had a lot of really interesting things to say about how that process shaped him for this year. We welcome a very special guest, QB1 of the TCU Horned Frogs, Chandler Morris, joins us. And Chandler, I have to ask you something. I talked to Sonny Dykes about this. I saw you interviewed about this earlier in the year. You said you have the best hands on the team. Has this been challenged by your receivers? Like, did they hear this and say, no?
Yeah, I mean, I say it often in the locker room, and they strongly disagree because, I mean, the receivers, they obviously claim they have the best hands on the team, and each one of them individually says that theirs are the best. So I personally think I do. I catch pretty much 100% of the snaps, and I tell them that all the time. I'm like, hey, my catch radius, I'm 100%. Y'all have some drops, so I let them know.
Well, Sonny said, he's like, he may have a point. He grew up playing in Texas, so you're doing all that 7-on-7. So he's probably actually caught more balls than all of them combined.
That's right. I mean, shoot, I played receiver, kind of half receiver, half quarterback in my 8th grade year. So I mean, I'm not foreign to it.
I just mean catching snaps. I mean, you have to catch a snap every play. You're not running under center most of the time. So
that's right.
Kendall would occasionally do that at Arkansas. Is that something you guys might break out?
Absolutely. I mean, we'll go under center every now and then on some kind of like special plays that week, I guess. So yeah, I mean, that was similar to us last year, and really any offense I've been in since college. Really, you'll have some kind of packages underneath center.
How many different offenses have you been in now? Is this number 4 or 5?
This will be my 4th year, and it will be my 4th system. So a system year.
How now? For those who don't know, your dad was a longtime high school coach, then became a college coach. So he has been around and been in a bunch of different places. How much did having that environment growing up help you deal with learning all these different systems, calls, vocabularies?
Yeah, I mean, it helped a ton. I mean, just being around the game, like I picked up a lot of stuff that I've even realized I picked up from being at all of his practices and kind of being in the film room and watching football with him. And then definitely like the language and stuff. I mean, I have a good grasp of it, being around the game for a while. I mean, at the end of the day, there's almost every coach uses a different language. So it's like they'll call some protections or blitzes a different thing than another coach would. So really having to kind of adjust with that. So, I mean, it's helped a lot just being around the game because of my dad.
You were talking to the local media the other day about how you handled last year, and you mentioned the Jalen Hurts story, and I'm assuming you're talking about 2018 when he's lost the job to Tua Tagovailoa, yet when they needed him to come in the SEC championship game, there he was. How did you use that last year after Max took the job and basically didn't give it back?
I mean, like I said, it really gave me a lot of hope and kind of kept a chip on my shoulder because, I mean, you go out and you win the job in camp and you get hurt in the 3rd quarter, like 27 plays into the game, and you're done. And then Max goes on and takes advantage of a great opportunity for him, and the rest is history. So, I mean, each week, I mean, it's hard being a backup. I mean, I'd been a backup for a while, and it was really hard. It was long nights and where I don't feel like watching film. It's like, okay, well, I didn't play last week. Why do I need to be prepared this week? But the moment you don't prepare, that's the moment your team's going to need you the most. And Jalen Hurts, that story, I mean, that whole season, he was the previous season, he's the starter. They go to the national championship game. He gets pulled in the national championship game at halftime, and they go on and win the game, and he has a smile on his face after the game. And but he also told and explained how hard it was. It was very difficult. And then the next season, he was a backup and kind of having to switch roles, and his team needed him at one point, and I think it was the SEC championship game, and he leads them back and goes on and beats Georgia. So really seeing that and kind of getting a chip on my shoulder from that story, just to just be motivated to stay ready to be there for my teammates.
And you played with him at Oklahoma, right? Did you talk to him about that?
No, he was the year before.
Oh, okay. He was already gone. Okay.
He was the year before. I was at the Elite 11, though, I guess the summer going into my senior year. And he came and talked to all of us, and very impactful. I mean, you could just see the fire in his eyes, and that was going to be the season that he was going to play at OU, and it was going to be really his first season back as a starter.
So for you, you said in the spring that you probably learned some things last year in that situation that you hadn't even realized you'd learn yet. Now that you're a little bit further along and you're a few days away from your first game again as the starter, do you think you figured out what some of those things are?
A little bit. I mean, obviously taking what they give you on defense and protecting the football. Got to watch Max do that. He really protected the ball well last year and put us in good positions. And also just showing up, not taking a day for granted. I mean, there's not going to be a day I'm going to walk out there on that field and not be excited about practice and grateful that I'm the starting quarterback and understand that there's other people coming for my job. And just really being grateful for that and taking pride in that and just loving my job.
So it's interesting because you guys lost a lot of good players. I remember watching the draft and thinking, man, I don't even think I realized how talented this team was, but you do bring back quite a bit. And then also you've gone to the transfer portal and gotten some guys sometimes the guys in transfer portal are ones who were big recruits, didn't really play much at their previous school. You're getting guys who've played quite a bit. JP Richardson, JoJo Earl, how much have they helped and how quickly have they come in and learned everything?
I mean, they've helped a lot. They've had a lot of snaps underneath their belt, very experienced, like you said, and they've came in and they haven't skipped a beat. I always call them plug and play guys. I mean, you put them in and they're ready to play, and they understand the offense. Obviously, with the new system with Coach Briles, it was a lot to pick up, and they did a great job on that. And there's a lot put on their plate as an inside receiver. Just to name a few of JoJo and JP. We've got many others from the transfer portal that have played a lot of snaps at the schools they've been at. I'm not going to list them all. I know I'll miss a few, but
yeah,
no, all of them. I mean, every single one of them that's come in here, they picked it up, and especially with our culture. I mean, kind of this off season with workouts and really kind of engraving it in their heads that this is how things are going to be done here, and this is what we're looking for, and they did a great job.
So I talked to Sonny, and he basically said, if someone had told him this time last year, this team's going to play for the national title, he would have thought they were crazy. What, for you guys who were there, who saw it all, what was it about that group that made it possible to do what you guys did?
I think it was the want to. I mean, that senior class, they'd been through so much. They experienced a lot of adversity through their years at TCU, and that really drove them and made them angry almost. I mean, whenever there's a TCU football team is angry, I mean, you go back and look at it. I mean, they win.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was definitely just a chip on their shoulder, and it was a mindset. And we had the talent. We just had to put it together, and we did.
It's funny you mentioned angry TCU teams do tend to be the best, but I go back to the Dutch Meyer quote: "The fight them till hell freezes over, then fight them on the ice." You guys see that right before you take the field at home games, right?
Yep, it's in the tunnel. It's on the wall, and you walk and you touch it the entire time.
Do they tell because it's one of those, it's like, it's funny at first, but then you're like, damn, they're serious about this.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a known thing here. I mean, it's written all over the facility. I mean, there's T-shirts made of them all over all over campus. So, I mean, it's a known thing, and I like it.
So what are you doing differently to prepare for this Colorado game than, say, last year when you were also preparing to start against Colorado?
I mean, this year it's a little different. Obviously, they have a new staff. They've got I mean, their entire roster is different. And so you can't really turn on Colorado film like we really could last year and break them down. So you're watching, I guess, a lot of Alabama. Their defense coordinator came from Bama. I think he's a safeties coach. So really watching them a little bit and not trying to get too hung up on all that, though. I mean, at the end of the day, we got to be good at what we do. We got to be confident in what we do, and just go out and execute, because they're going to show up in some different things. They're going to do some different things. That's how the first game goes. So really, it's just about going and doing what you can do, and being and executing.
We've been talking about Coach Prime, Deion Sanders all offseason. I'm thinking about this. You probably don't remember him as a player at all, do you?
No, sir.
That's amazing to me, because he was maybe the best cornerback who ever played. Yeah. So it's one of those that, like, all us old people are like, oh my God, it's Deion Sanders coaching. But for you guys, it's probably just the other team's coach, right?
Yeah. I mean, I got to play, I guess, on his team at the Under Armour All-American game in high school, I guess 2019. So kind of been around him a little bit, and yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity.
So what was he like in that coaching environment?
I mean, a lot of energy. He's what you see is what you get. I mean, he's got a lot of energy, and he's just passionate about the sport.
So now that you've had this year, you know, you've got your chance again. Is there something you tell yourself every day? You mentioned that you're not going to take anything for granted, but is there anything else that you took from last season that you're carrying forward right now?
Really just competing one play at a time. I mean, it's one day, it's one breath, and it's one play at a time. That's kind of my mindset every morning, every day. Because I mean, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, but also knowing that it can be taken away from you very quickly. And that's something I've kind of learned, and that's kind of my mindset, is just taking it one day, one play, and one breath at a time.
And those plays go faster, though, in Coach Bryle's offense, right?
They're rolling.
Is this the fastest of the offenses you've played in so far?
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely.
Is it? I've always wondered how quarterbacks, you like that, though, because the defense can't get set, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's it kind of forces them to get in their base stuff. I mean, we were at practice the other day. My dad got to come out and watch a little bit of it, and I'm talking to him on the field after, and he's like, I don't understand how y'all play so fast. How do y'all get set so fast? And I'm sitting there, I'm trying to explain it to him, and he's like, wow, like this is. I'm like, yeah, it takes reps.
So I watched a Peach Bowl. I covered a Peach Bowl against LSU where your dad was calling plays for Clemson, where they ran 104 plays, and if he thinks it's fast, then it's pretty fast.
Yeah, no, it's rolling.
I was gonna say, I just remember being in the tunnel after that game, and the poor LSU defensive players are just screaming because they're cramping because Clemson had run so many plays. So yeah, I was gonna say, if your dad thinks they're really rolling, then it's quick. But how long did it take you to get used to that tempo and get comfortable with it?
It took all spring. I mean, it leaked over into camp as well. I mean, probably a couple days into camp, we really started clicking a lot. I mean, Coach Bryles and his staff threw a lot at us in spring, on purpose though, and it was an adjustment. We struggled. We had some days we were struggling a lot, and but this camp we really made a big step and did a great job of picking it up and rolling with it, and we have more confidence in what we're doing now.
And I mean, given everything you did last year, how much internal confidence is there just as a team?
There's a ton. I mean, I tell the guys all the time that we know what the blueprint looks like. I mean, we have the blueprint. We've seen what it looks like to go and be on that stage that we want to be on. And now it's about just going out and executing and doing it. It's the want. We got to have the want to do it. Those mornings you don't want to wake up. You don't want to go to workouts at 5:50 in the morning. And when you notice that, you recognize that and tell yourself, all right, well, good. I mean, I've got to go dominate it now, and just kind of having that mindset and really doing the things that we don't want to do at a high level. All
right, Chandler, good luck, and enjoy that chance to start against Colorado again.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Chandler Morris, hopefully much better result for him against Colorado than last time. Obviously, TCU won the game against Colorado last year, but hopefully he has a much better game after and game after that and game after that. And, the TCU thing is interesting to me. We're obviously going to be talking about Coach Prime in Colorado, the massive roster flip. TCU is a probably pretty different team than the one you saw last year, but they are bringing back a core of guys who had a lot to do with going to the Big 12 championship game, going to the national championship game, beating Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl. And he's not wrong about the plug and play guys out of the portal. JP Richardson from Oklahoma State, Trey Sanders from Alabama. These are people who should be able to come in and contribute immediately. So I'm excited to see what they can do because I'm not sure they're going to fall off that much. Now, I think, are they going to do what they did last year? That's asking a lot. That was a very special team, and also the team had some good fortune along the way. But are they going to be one of the best teams in the Big 12? Yeah, I think they probably are. So we'll get a chance to see them, and we'll get a chance to see Coach Prime and Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders and the new look Buffaloes. Guys, we're so close to a full weekend of college football, but we had a little taste this past weekend, including USC's win against San Jose State. Yogi Roth was on the call for the Pac-12 Network. He joins us to talk about USC and Caleb Williams and Zachariah Branch and where the Trojans have come from last year, and also the rest of the Pac-12. This is as deep as that league has been in decades, and it is going to be a fun year. And Yogi will tell you, there's a bunch of teams that can win it. Here's Yogi Roth. We're joined now by a very special guest. You heard him Saturday night on the call of USC San Jose State, Yogi Roth from the Pac-12 Network. What's up, Yogi?
Andy, thank you for having me. Congrats on this next move in your career. It's been fun to track all of your moves from back in the day when we all kind of got going in this business. And from off the field, on the field, you're always entertaining, and appreciate you tuning into the game last night and looking forward to today, man.
Oh, my pleasure. It was quite a game. And, you guys obviously have seen this team a lot. You've seen this USC program evolve into what it is right now. How different did you feel like this team looked compared to last year's USC team?
Well, I was at practice earlier this week, and when it ended, I got to catch up with Coach Riley for a few. And I said, this is the first time I've been on this practice field in my life where it felt like it did back when I was on the staff. And I was on the staff with Pete Carroll when it was going. And I don't mean like top end talent everywhere. Like, I don't know if Cedric Ellis is on this team yet, the defensive line, but the competitive depth. And you saw it. We talked about it all broadcast. They were coming at you in waves, not just with 10 deep at wideout, but 3-4 deep at running back, 8-9 deep on the offensive line, 8 deep on the defensive front, 4 deep at 2 inside linebacker, 5 deep at 2 inside linebacker spots. Like, you felt that at practice, Andy, and it makes practice competitive. I think back in the day, whether it was a year ago or a couple years ago, it had always been, no matter what happens in practice, I know I'll still play to a degree. And everybody preached competition. Every coach in America preaches competition, but you felt it in the way that it used to be for the first time. So yeah, man, huge difference in my eyes.
Well, and that depth part and then the young players, that was one thing I wanted to ask you about, because it did seem like some of the things that you could find to critique about this team, some of it had to do with how many guys they were rotating, how many young guys they were playing. So whether it was the offensive line, the defensive line, some of the mistakes at your halftime show, the crew on your halftime show, I think it was Max Brown, did a great job breaking down the coverage bust at the end of the first half that allowed San Jose State to score right there at the end, and explaining that you're putting Damani Jackson in a tough spot as a guy who hasn't played very much, but maybe later in the season, that's something he can handle. How much of some of the mistakes we saw from USC were them trying to play a bunch of guys?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And I didn't get to watch what Max did, but huge fan of just how he sees the game. And there was a PI later in the game in the second half on Damani Jackson. We talked about it in the booth of, hey, you can't replicate live game reps on a fade ball in the red zone. You can't replicate changing your defense at the snap and putting Damani Jackson playing a deep safety spot where he's got to get over the top half the field, and he misses it in practice. So it's just hard. So I love that point. And I do think that when you net out of the opener for USC, yes, they won. The score looked dominant, but there was so much to clean up. And I think a lot of it, to your point, has to do with the rotation of players. And I love that they rotated guys, because this is what Lincoln Riley told us in our production meeting, where we said, how are you going to manage? Let's just talk about receivers. Now, I'm a former wideout. You have an ego as a wideout. You want the rock as a wideout. You go to USC to win the Blitnikoff. Like, that is the goal. Well, you got 10 deep. Caleb's not going to complete 50 passes a game, let alone attempt 30, right? And he said, look, we've told the players from day one, this is all about what you do in practice. And if it's 50-50 and leave it up to us, don't be mad if it doesn't go your way. And he goes, we've had to be straight up. And I think that played itself out when you watch the rotation of guys, of how Zachariah Branch was in a lot. Malik Brown, you didn't see him till the game was relatively in hand. But that doesn't mean this week against Nevada, we're calling it again on Saturday afternoon on the Pac-12 Network. Maybe Malik Brown has a great week of practice and becomes that leader in the slot position. And that's just what allows, I think, SC, and especially in LA, like, you know this, man, but it's so different than Tuscaloosa or Athens, from having to operate at your best in an environment like Los Angeles. It's just like, it's a different planet. And if you disagree, then you probably have never been to LA and been around it. And I just feel like competition is the only thing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that is going to allow Lincoln Riley to keep his team on a razor's edge.
Which at that position, especially receiver, you're going to get it. I mean, Zachariah Branch looked unbelievable. The Reggie Bush comparisons, different positions, different people. But I mean, the first two punt returns, I'm like, oh, he's taking something back tonight. And it turned out it was a kickoff. And then the touchdown he scored, he's a guy, I mean, you get him the ball in space, you just let him cook.
Yeah, it's a wrap. It's interesting, as just to take you inside the broadcast, as he, Ted calls the actual return for a touchdown, I call the replay. That's how broadcasting works. Well, in it, I'm right up to the cusp of saying Reggie, and I hit the talk back button, which is a button where you can talk to your producer. Want to put it on the kid, on this young man.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, if you believe it. So then on the second replay, I said, and he reminds you of number 5. And I believe that in the way that he moves. And I think a lot of people were comping him to Adoree Jackson. Adoree was much smoother. He was a glider, a type of athlete. Zachariah Branch has put his foot in the ground like Reggie. And when you go back to, I guess it'd be 2003, his freshman year, you talked to Coach Carroll about what they did for him. They gave him 5 plays on offense and let him play special teams and let him run wheel routes, rub routes, angle routes, and then outside zone. And then, of course, special teams and a slant and go. And that was it. Like, that was what Reggie did. And so for Zachariah Branch, we saw him play like he did in high school, which was fast. And I love how they're not muddling him up with too much. By the end of the season, maybe he does move all over the place. It's even more of a matchup nightmare. But you're right. His sheer athleticism, his explosiveness, it is special, and it reminds you of somebody that used to rock the Cardinal and gold, pending probably which way you want to lean, whether it's Adoree or Reggie.
I definitely think Reggie in terms of results. Adoree, as good as he was, Branch seems to have a little higher ceiling in terms of explosiveness and what he can be in the return game and on offense. So, I mean, it's pretty amazing what he did in game one. And that he's just scratching the surface. But I want to talk about Caleb, who... Is there anybody else in the country that can pick up that fumble and throw that pass?
Not many that would have the guts to do it. In coaching, around quarterbacks, when that happens, you say, just don't make a bad situation a catastrophe, just fall on it. But I think his confidence in his athleticism, in terms of, hey, I see the way the ball is bouncing, I can see in which it's going to come up to me. And then his eyes remaining downfield. And then how about Taj Washington? He just kept running. Usually a receiver, if you're going to run that type of route and you feel the defensive backs driving towards the line of scrimmage, you're thinking maybe it's a scramble. But they do that scramble drill so often in practice where they know that a play is never dead. And he just kept running his route and, of course, ran right by the defensive backs going the opposite direction. And you're right. Caleb, with his confidence to pick it up, eyes downfield, knew exactly what to look at, saw it, launched it, and gave Taj Washington an opportunity. But, yeah, it wasn't surprising, but you're right. Not many guys, I think, would even attempt to do that.
I just love his instincts. I remember when he was a freshman at Oklahoma, there was a play against Kansas where, one of his players, I think it was one of the backs.
Fourth down.
Yeah, has the ball down the field, and he is ripping it out of his hands to try to get more yards. Like he's just such an instinctual player, but it feels like those instincts have been kind of reined into a manageable, let's make sure it's going to work instead of let's just try this.
Yeah, well, I think that my biggest takeaway for his game last night, and we said it towards the end, I don't know how many people tuned out by then, but really about him playing in the pocket, and his whole number one goal this offseason was situational football and the awareness of that. You saw it in the second quarter. He goes from right to left all the way across the field and throws it to a check down on a swing route. He just, to me, compared to last year, got through his progressions with more confidence and at a different clip. Sat in the pocket, maybe even to his own chagrin sometimes, because he did take a couple sacks. Mm-hmm. But I think the discipline to play within it and allowing the plays to develop. Last year we saw him put his back foot in the ground, and if one wasn't there, especially his first half of the season, he took off, right? Go to the Oregon State game, go to the Washington State game, at times even the Arizona game last year. We called a bunch of those. And I think now you're just seeing a guy who really attacked the offseason at the position. And I can't wait to watch it against next week, because he's going to see every DC we talk to. It's a different scheme, different way, a different picture, changing it up every other snap. And for Caleb to trust his eyes in their pure progression system in the pocket is something that I'm going to take away to build into the show next week.
So let's talk about the defense. There were some things that made it feel a little bit like last year. And I know they've brought in a lot through the transfer portal, but it's still an Alex Grinch defense in terms of size, body types, all that stuff. I get a little worried when it's 3rd and 22 and they're getting really exotic. Why not just let your athletes be better athletes and make a play?
You talking about the touchdown?
No, 3rd and 22 that set up the first
QB
touchdown.
Scramble. Yeah.
Yeah. The Chef Cordero getting out the back door.
Yeah. So we broke that one down coming out of the half, and both coaching staffs use this term that, you're familiar with. If you're not, as a viewer, I'll explain it, but it's called plastering, meaning when the quarterback scrambles, defensive backs are taught to plaster, which is get as close as you can to the wide receiver, chest against chest, just try to become a magnet of sorts. And they're in man coverage on that play. And the play just keeps, it just keeps going and going and going. Well, if you're a DB and you're in man coverage and the play keeps going, you're thinking against San Jose State and Chevin Cordero, preseason Mountain West Player of the Year on offense, God, he might be scrambling. So I get that play where it was Christian Roland Wallace, to be specific, who just continued to run with the receivers as Chevin Cordero is getting closer and closer to him, ends up just running right off his back. And I think that's one where I kind of live with. Like, I think that becomes a feel thing.
The two twists up front on that play that you don't need. Like, just let your D linemen win their one-on-ones, and you probably are not giving up 22 yards.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, because sometimes guys run right into those twists, but I hear you. And I think that's the point of them playing so many guys. Like, the way the game started, you're thinking Mason Cobb, Tackett Curtis, here we go. It's their show. And then Eric Gentry comes in for one of them and then the other. And you're saying, okay, they're trying to figure out who's who. They're running line changes on the defensive front to find out who can play. At some points, it's 4 transfers. At some point, it's 3 freshmen. So I don't know, man. I think the skill set, you could tell, is dramatically different than a year ago.
Yeah.
And I do think that you got to find a feel and a rhythm as a coach for who can do what when the lights are on. So there's going to be busts against Nevada next week, and their quarterback, who's a transfer from Colorado. I think there's like 10 transfers from the Pac-12 on Nevada's roster. So it's not like they won't have athletes that can make plays. And I'm curious to see how the first 3 weeks net out with Alex Grinch, and then what they change after the bye week and how exotic they continue to get, or, to your point, if they do temper it down.
Well, Bear Alexander and Jack Sullivan can play. I think we figured that out. Bear Alexander was either commanding a triple team or somewhere in the backfield a lot of the night. So that was, and Georgia's got like 6 of those guys, which is why Georgia's Georgia. But now they're spreading the wealth a little bit. So, Yogi, I want to talk to you a little bit about the rest of the Pac-12, because this is probably the most heartbreaking thing of what's happened to the league, is that it happens in a year when this is the best football product the Pac-12 has put on the field in a generation.
Yeah, no, I might argue more than that. It's my 20th year around this league, and I don't ever remember the depth. Nick Aliotti doesn't remember the depth. Nobody does. Ted Robinson doesn't remember the depth. He's been calling Pac-10, 12 games for 38 years. And it's true. And you're right. It's sad and it doesn't make sense. And a lot of people in our industry are saying the same note, but unfortunately it doesn't matter, because we know what drives the conversation and we know what's driving realignment and we know what, in my opinion, is going to drive the next generation of fans to not care about leagues. My kids aren't going to give a damn about the Pac-12 other than the fact that dad used to work there.
Yeah.
They're going to be SC fans or UCLA fans because we go to practice. And they get to know Chip Kelly and Lincoln Riley and different players come over and hang out. Like that's their experience. And I think it's going to be the same thing around the country. I don't think you're going to throw down dramatically for the Big 12 if you're in Tucson or for the Big 10 if you're in Seattle. I don't think you're going to care. And I think that's really unfortunately the nature of college athletics now is that it's all about what is best for me. Whether it's Ohio State saying, hey, we got to take care of 36 sports now. So let's not add Stanford and Cal. I'm just making that narrative up.
Yeah, right.
Everybody is basically out for themselves. And that was driven by the people that are broadcasting the games. Let's not be ignorant about it. That's just the fact. So yeah, it's a sad state. And it's been brutal on my colleagues and people I've grown to love over the last 12 years in the Pac-12 conference because the league didn't deserve that. I get there's a lot of holes to poke and there's a lot of blame to go around and it can go all the way around. You can start at the top. You can start at the networks. You can start at the CFP. You can start at 9 conference games. I mean, there's 1,000 things that we can debate about. But the sad part is that it's over. The one thing I will say from being on about half the campuses in training camp, majority of people in leadership positions think it's going to blow up again in just a couple of years. Yeah. So hopefully it does, and maybe we get the Big East back, and we call it the Pac-10 again. Like it'll just become regional divisions anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, all right. This iteration, it's going to go out with a bang.
Yeah.
How many teams, as we sit on the eve of week 1, can win the league this year?
Yeah, I'm looking at my composite schedule of all the games on my desk here, and I look at 5. I feel really good about, and maybe 6. To win the league. And I think 7 and 8 can upset anybody. So at the top, I voted UW to win the league. And I look at Washington to, of course, SC, Utah, by the way, 2-time defending champs. People forget about.
Oregon. We always do that.
We always do that, right? And they're gonna roll in the Big 12. You look at Oregon, they've had a CFP caliber roster since 2018 every year. They've got the bodies, and Dan Lanning has only added to that. I talk about Oregon State because I think they've got the best schedule to get to the title game, who they play, where they play, and most importantly, who they miss. And then having been at UCLA last week, man, it's the best team Chip's had. I don't know if there's a first-round pick, but it's the best group of receivers he's ever had as a college coach. The offensive line is solid. Carson Steele, they love it, transfer at running back. They've got tight ends for days, 6'4", 250 plus. Every single one of them can block and catch. The defensive line might have the best pass rusher in the Pac-12 and Liatu Latu and a host of other guys with a ton of experience. They bring in Femi Oladejo to play the inside backer alongside Darius Muasau. Back end might have a couple questions, but they got experience and length with a new defensive coordinator and D'Anton Lynn, Anthony Lynn's son. So I look at those teams and say, it's going to be fun. And, oh, by the way, Arizona had one of the top 5 offenses in America last year. Yep. And Washington State is as salty as they come. And I've watched those 2 teams in training camp or in spring, and I think they can. So I just look at those teams right there with, of course, the dramatic unknown in Colorado. We have zero clue what that's going to look like. Yeah. We don't know what's going to happen at Arizona State, but we imagine they'll score some points. They'll knock somebody off among those 8 that I referenced. So it's going to be an awesome year. And Cal's played as good a defense as anybody in the last 7 years in this league. And now they got Sam Jackson, who's pretty dynamic. We don't know what they'll be with Jake Spavital. They'll knock somebody off. Yeah. So you're right. It is going to be awesome. And I love non-con. I love any football. But when we get to conference play this year, Ted and I talk about it, especially with these new clock rules, the last 5 minutes of games with these quarterbacks, dude, they're going to be off the hook. We're going to be drawing and circling and coaching and screaming and yelling. It's going to be so much fun once we get into conference play. And we're going to, as Ted said to open the broadcast, we are going to celebrate the you-know-what out of that, not cry about this league falling apart. and then pick it up where it picks up, because thankfully, regardless of league affiliation or logo, call it NASCAR, call it the Big 18, it doesn't matter, because the teams are still going to play and the games next year are going to be fun.
So we've all basically agreed that Washington's going to be good. You're the first person I've talked to who picked them to win the league. So obviously great quarterback in Michael Penix Jr., probably the best returning receiving core in the league, if not the country. They can get after the quarterback too. What else about them excites you?
Well, I think the pickups they've had in the portal, right, whether it's at linebacker and Raylene Goforth from SC, who was a starter at linebacker early in his career there and played a lot last year. In the secondary, they bring in Muhammad from OK State to play a corner. And then I was there and I spent a bunch of time. I got a feature on Michael Penix Jr. coming out before week 3 when they play at Michigan State on him and why he returned. And I spent a couple of days just around Kalen DeBoer in that program, watched those guys work. Walked into the receiver room at 11 a.m. and receivers in there studying on their own, and Jalen McMillan. Sat down with Roma Dunze and really got to know what makes these guys tick. And then I look at the schedule and I get that they beat Oregon on the road, and Oregon could beat them at home. Mm-hmm. But I'd go with UW at home. Like I went with Oregon last year at home. I think it's so hard to win that game, and that'll be a great test for them around midseason. They've got to stretch just like everybody else with SC and Utah and Oregon State. But there was just something where I said, I think this program, and it's hard, right? Because you can nitpick at least the 4 teams all day long. Like, you really can make a case for any of them. And I wouldn't be shocked if I was wrong on this. But I just leaned into it and I said, I think I just trust that the most, because I didn't know about Cam Rising. If Cam Rising is healthy, I'd probably pick Utah, because I think they're the best defense in the league. And if you said, give me a team from this league to go play Georgia or go play Bama or go play Ohio State, I'd probably take Utah based on their defense and their offense when healthy. It's just an unknown for me, which is why I didn't go with them.
Well, and that's the next question is they've got Florida coming in. They're going to be all eyes on them on Thursday night. Do you think we're going to see Cam? What do you think that's going to look like?
I don't know. I've talked to people there that they don't know either, so I'm sure there'll be a report from Kyle Whittingham on Monday of this week at his press conference or whenever he does that. And I don't think he'll be coy about it. I think he's been blunt about it. And I learned this at Media Days, where he said it's going to come right down to the wire. And then a few minutes later, Cam Rising comes to the same stage and he goes, no, I'm ready to go. And of course, I just trusted what coach said. And okay, like, there's some hurdles for him, and he's not going to put him out there if he's not 100%. But I'll tell you what I believe the most in this team is that this team came back for like their version of The Last Dance. I believe that in my gut. I can't confirm that from all the levels. When I look at Kyle Whittingham to Andy Ludwig to Cam Rising to Brant Keithy to Thomas Yasmin, Devon Vele, there's a lot of players decided to run it back. This team is as mission-minded as I've ever seen. And I think media polls mean relatively squat, but when they get no votes, and Cam Rising isn't even honorable mention quarterback, I sat around Cole Bishop at Media Days. I've talked to players on this roster. There is a different edge. And last year, I think it was 28 missed tackles in the opener against Anthony Richardson in Florida on the road. They'll have less than 10. They got one of the best edge rushers in the country. You'll hear about Jonah Ellis, Lander Barton, a linebacker, Cole Bishop, as I referenced. I mean, they've got talent for days on this back end. They bring in Micah Pittman. They got a freshman, Mikey Matthews, at wide receiver, best receiving core they've had. Running back, Jaquinton Jackson. He looks the part and proved it last year in the champ game when they ran all over USC and other games where he played. And this is a guy who was a third-string quarterback in week 3 last year. Became a running back in week 4 against ASU and got some spot duty and then became the man. So I just believe in this team. And at home, I think it'll be a great game. But I think they get the win because they won't make those first game mistakes that I think most teams just make because it's the first game. I think Utah's too veteran, even if it's Bryson Barnes.
I was on the radio with Rick Neuheisel last week, and he mentioned, why not put Jackson at Wildcat? And I was like, oh, that's scary, because he's great at reading the hole, and then you've got that extra blocker. And I was like, Rick, I think Kyle Whittingham's probably mad at you for mentioning that, if they had that plan. But that does seem like a pretty good idea too, especially if it winds up being Bryson Barnes, who's, we've seen him have to come in the Rose Bowl and be good, but that's a tough spot to put a kid in, when the whole college football world looking at you.
Well, I'll say this. We don't have any data, right? We just have however many games there were from week 0. But I do think the new clock rules are going to benefit teams like Utah.
Yeah,
and
grind it
we felt it in the game. I mean, last night's game was on pace for being a 3-hour game.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had some gnarly penalties that took forever on reviews at the end. But I think that for Utah, to your point, they are going to run the football, and they'll find whether it's Mekhi Bernard, who's been in the Wildcat before, dynamic playmaker, Jaquindon Jackson. I mean, they've got a bevy of backs. You're right. I think we'll see creative things. Hey, Utah's coming off of the most explosive offense, record-setting numbers in the history of Utah football last year. So this is not like the Utah 5-7 years ago where, hey, let's run the clock out, be physical. Like, there's some explosive elements and very creative elements with Andy Ludwig, their offensive coordinator. So, yeah, man, wouldn't be shocked if we saw number 3 at quarterback taking some snaps directly to him in the Wildcat.
So you mentioned UCLA earlier, and I'm fascinated by this because did you envision that this was what Chip would decide he wanted offensively? Because obviously when he was in the league the first time around, it was not the same thing. He used the change in the clock rules back then to create a kind of a paradigm shift in how offensive football works throughout the country. But this feels even more physical. Like he ran a lot between the tackles back then, but this feels so much more physical, almost like they're building to be a Big Ten team.
Yeah. I think that Chip Kelly has always wanted to run the football. And when you go and study him, whether it was up tempo or that he's taking his time and using the play clock, when he found an weakness on the defense, he would expose it. I talked to guys that played for him, and even in the NFL, he would say, hey, blood in the water, let's attack. And they would run the same personnel, the same play 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a row and just keep going. I think that as we've seen him completely rebuild UCLA's football team, because it was a complete rebuild. He didn't out of the portal and be able to do what Lincoln did or what Deion Sanders has been doing or Kenny Dillingham has done. He has had to go old school in terms of identifying and developing. And if you know Chip Kelly, he could give a damn about identifying what star ranking you are. It is all about DNA fit. It is all about like literal DNA and like, what does your body tell you? And they have all these things in terms of how they evaluate players and their projections. And man, you can't hate on it. And then in the portal, what he's done is they've missed on one player out of, I think, 40 some players that have come into the portal. All of them have started, right? And they're coming from Harvard. They're coming from Duke. They're coming from Alabama. They're coming from Notre Dame. They're coming from schools where guys can handle books and ball. And I do think there's a huge part of what Chip Kelly's doing there where guys are highly intelligent. Kind of reminds you a little bit of Stanford back in the day when they were rolling at the Rose Bowl of, their functional football intelligence is as good as you're going to find, I would bet, in the country. And they could play. And now the portal's alive. And now NIL is working in LA. And you get J. Michael Sturdivant and Kyle Ford to be your 2 6'3", 6'4" wide receivers that can simply fly down the field. You can get the best back in a group of 5 in Carson Steele to come be your lead back at UCLA. You can find offensive linemen that can come in via the portal last year or this year and slide right in at the tackle positions. And I just think that evaluation process allowed him to put together a team that, to your point, can be very physical and be very explosive. So I don't know who will net out at quarterback, if it's Ethan Garbers or Dante Moore, but I do think that their ability to take you down the field is probably better than if we were going to project them at 6th than the 6th team in the Big Ten. Like, I still think they have some of that Pac-12 flash that people are generally accustomed to associating this league with.
Well, I'm excited to see it. Carson Steele is maybe the transfer I'm most excited to see in his new place. He didn't bring his pet alligator along with him. It's a shame. Crocky J left at home in suburban Indy. But before I let you go, I do want to ask you this because you're very involved in the quarterback recruiting world and understand that world really well. If I had told you when all of that stuff was going on with Jaden Rashada, when he's leaving Florida, when he's trying to figure out what he's going to do, that he's going to be a day 1 starter at a Power 5 school, true freshman, what would you have said?
I would have said, God, I hope to God his head coach and offensive coordinator give a rip about who he is as a human versus what his arm can do. And I went out to Camp Tonazona, which is where Arizona State went for a few days in training camp. And I just wanted to observe him because I didn't call it in spring. I hadn't seen Kenny Dillingham's program yet. And you're watching Drew Pine and Trenton Bourguet running with the 1s and 2s. And as practice ended, I spent a bunch of time with Jaden Rashada because I was with him at Elite 11 when the rumor broke. I don't know if we know what
this is all the Miami stuff.
The Miami deal.
And,
and I was there, and it was hard on him. And I was with Chris Peterson, who works with us at Elite 11 now, which is amazing. And we're there talking to Jaden on the side. And I remember asking him, I said, how are you going to manage all this? And the attention was something we've never seen, right? We've been there with Quinn Ewers, and he went viral first throw at Steve Clarkson's camp. We've been there when Christian Hackenberg and Penn State was there, but social media wasn't what it was. I mean, this was different than anything. And he said, I'm going to turn my phone off. And I remember we looked at him and said, okay, but you're going to have to find real tools to deal with this, because shutting it down and turning it off isn't a real tool. And then he continued to go through all the drama that we read about and was covered by some of our friends in our business around what happened in Florida, and really how the adults in the room screwed him, and how the adults in the room who don't get a lot of blame a lot, were kind of putting on a 17, 18-year-old kid of, oh, label him however you want to label him because he didn't decide to stay here.
He was pimped from start to finish. And that's the part that,
that part makes you sick.
Yeah, I wrote that big story about what happened at Florida, and it's just like, at no point did it seem like Jaden Rashada had anything to do with any of this.
You're right. And I think just to give that context, when I sat with him on the sideline at Camp T post-practice, I said, how you doing? He goes, I've never been happier. I've never been happier. And you look at Kenny Dillingham and what he did at Florida State with the quarterback now who's up for the Heisman. You look at Kenny Dillingham and what he did with Bo Nix. I got a piece coming out on Bo you're going to love in 2 weeks before they play Tech. And it's all about how at Auburn, like, they love you if you win them money, right? Or you allow their team to win and they can celebrate. But if you don't play well or if you lose, then it's death threats. Then it's you're not a human. And I think for Bo coming out to Dan Lanning's culture, which Kenny Dillingham was a huge part of, it allowed him to find joy again. And that's really what the piece is about. And I'd say the same thing with Jaden Rashada. He goes, I'm having fun, man. And then I went and talked to Bo Baldwin, his offensive coordinator, who's been around a long time. Of course, Kenny Dillingham was managing the entire roster, but Jaden as well. And they felt as though he's been in the best space of his career because he doesn't have other people's expectations on him. I mean, I wrote the book 5-Star QB where we interviewed a ton of guys like Jaden Rashada. And the one commonality, because most of them don't make it, heads up, like 12 of the 134 5-star quarterbacks that we wrote about were ever top 12 picks. It just doesn't happen. Excuse me. Most guys don't make it. And a lot of times they don't make it because they struggle with managing other people's expectations. So I love that Kenny Dillingham and his staff attack that from day one. Yeah. And I don't think Jaden Rashada is going to, win the Heisman in year one. I think he's going to have a ton of ups and downs. This offensive line is trying to figure itself out. But I do think that he's in a system that's going to allow him to play free and have fun. And if he was at Florida, if he wasn't the starter right now and Graham Mertz beat him out, I bet people would be calling him a bust, a piece of whatever.
Oh, it'd be awful. It'd be awful in the locker room. It'd be terrible with the fans. It would be awful. And that's why I wonder if what happened allowed him to say, you know what, screw all these other people. I don't need to worry about what they want. They kind of tossed me aside. So now I'm just going to do my thing. I really hope it works out for him.
Yeah, me too. I think it will. How we define works out is probably dependent upon the lens you view it. But
I don't care if he's a first round draft. I'm talking about have fun in college and go be a successful human being. That's all that matters.
I'm with you, man. And I think he will. And I think we're in an era now. And I talked to a lot of the coaches. And this is what is sad about the Pac-12's dissolution from what we know it, is that I've always felt the West Coast kind of stood for things a little bit bigger than just did you win or lose the game, just from a cultural standpoint, because there's other stuff going on. Like, I think fans love the sport just as much as other fans, but the fanatical element, the nothing else matters in the world, that's a different conversation, as you know, out West than it is in other parts of the country. And it was always nice for when guys could come back. Now, I think those institutions, they're not going anywhere, of course, but the league, the collective of those, I think offered that even as a branding element. Look at DJU, Jacob Eason. There's a lot of guys that have come on back to the West Coast and found a ton of success. And I hope that continues, or I hope the coaches continue to front load, hey, mental skills, having fun, being a college athlete, in this semi-professionalization of this sport and the realignment of this sport and the money and the media driving this sport within our walls, we're going to allow you to continue to develop here, especially at that position. And I think the head coaches out in the West Coast, especially now, I think it's the best collection we've ever had on the West Coast. I think Kalen DeBoer, hell of a job. Dan Lanning. I mean, these guys are Jonathan Smith. They all front load the human. And my last thing is Chip Kelly gave the best quote ever in the book where he said, praise and blame are all the same. And that's his advice to a 5-star quarterback. And I just think that in and of itself there's so much to unpack. And he cited it beautifully in chapter 1 of our book around that concept of praise and blame are all the same. And if you can get to that point as a young man who's growing their social to make money in NIL, I get it, growing their social to sell their brand and their clothing line or whatever it may be, which I love, but can you disconnect from the praise and blame? It'll allow you to play well. And that's why I think Caleb Williams, to kind of circle back to where we started, that's why he's the blueprint for this generation of elite quarterbacks, is how he's handled it and managed everything around him in this position.
Well, I think we figured out what his fingernails are going to say for the UCLA game. Praise, blame. Done.
Yeah. I don't think there's going to be anything on his fingernails this season. He learned that there will be nothing. I will make that hard prediction right now.
Probably not. Well, Yogi, thank you so much. And yes, get Yogi's book. I cannot recommend enough. And watch Yogi next week, USC Nevada on the Pac-12 Network.
Anybody can find it. Get it on Sling. If you're frustrated, then that's on you, because it's been 12 years of frustration, and there's ways to get it, guys. Anybody can.
It's heard a lot of complaints.
I'm just saying. I mean, just figure it out. It's the internet.
All right, Yogi. Thank you so much.
You got it, bro. Thanks for having me.
The great Yogi Roth, and everything that guy does is awesome. He makes documentaries. He does these feature stories on these guys. It's a lot of fun. So I cannot wait to see what he's got coming out of Bo Nix, because I do think Bo's one of the more interesting players in college football this season. And there's a lot to unpack in the Pac-12. You know, he talked about all those different teams that could win it. We didn't really get a chance to talk much about Oregon State. DJ Uiagalelei starting for them with an offensive line that has come back mostly intact. Lots of starters back on that team. It's going to be a fun year in that league. But before we go, we got to talk about the UMass Minutemen. That's right. UMass had not won a road game in 24 tries when they went to Las Cruces on Saturday. They had not won their season opener against an FBS opponent since 1984. But the Minutemen and quarterback Tyson Pumashon, who you probably know from Clemson and then from Georgia Tech, pulled out a 41-30 win. It was a fun game too. I'm very happy for these guys. And you know, Don Brown, the coach, went through a 1-11 season last year, and they went and beat a team that was supposed to beat them by a touchdown. This was the biggest upset of week 0. New Mexico State, Jerry Kill had them in a bowl game last year. Remember, he got the tattoo. Well, big win for the Minutemen. Tyson Pumashon, proof that, you know, eventually you find where you're supposed to be. And next up, the Auburn Tigers. Let's see if they can keep it going on the Plains. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you for listening. We got some program updates for you guys. Thursday, instead of 8 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to start at 7 p.m. Eastern time, because we want to make sure that you have a chance to go watch Florida, Utah, and go watch Minnesota, Nebraska, and all the other games you might be watching. So we're going to go 7 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday night. And then we're going to be live after those games. So you can come back on YouTube and watch live. If you want all of that, I will attach the live reaction to the front of the show when you listen in podcast form the next morning. So it'll all be there for you if you want it in podcast form. So we'll do it that way. And then Sunday night, also next week, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Because remember, we got Florida State LSU at 8 p.m. I will be covering that game in Orlando, and I will be live after that talking about it. So a little bit different schedule because it's a little bit different week. It is opening week, full opening week of college football season. Let's get excited, everybody. We are right there on the cusp. Your team is about to start playing. We're about to start learning what 2023 is going to bring. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow.